For the today, for the sort of the flow, and that is a good reminder that I will also, I think it's been a couple of weeks since I sent out that link. There is a link directly to our channel, Chabad Learning Center on YouTube, and these classes are publicly available, so you can always make up, study, or review. But chapters 2, in chapter 1, again, is sort of the introduction. We hear the premise of the Tanya, which is that we really don't understand what a tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha is, which we would normally translate as a good guy, a bad guy, and a sort of an average guy. We don't really know what that means. We then, at the end of chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe introduces us to the two souls. And then we spend chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5 really understanding that, what we call the second soul, which is the godly soul. This godly soul, as we discussed at length in chapter 1, it is a piece of God. Now, although it is a literal piece of God, everyone has a different version and every soul has different levels. There's obviously a lot of granularity, there's a lot of differences, and that's because although it is a piece of God, it descends through the various worlds, picking up different imperfections along the way. And then we continue and we discuss, what does this godly soul want? What does it experience? And so we said it has the 10 attributes, which mirror God's 10 attributes. It has the 3 intellectual ones. It grasps God. It understands God. It relates to God. That's Chachma, Bina, and Das. And because of that, it also loves God. It fears God. It wants to experience all the emotions in a godly way. Here you have one right here.
Oh, beg your pardon.
Let's just put that back here. And so, we then continue with chapter 4 and 5, where how does the godly soul act? How does it interface with the world, with godliness? How does it do what it wants to do? And so, as we explained, the godly soul has its 3 garments of thought, speech, and action. And when you think Torah, what you're doing is you are donning the garment of thought. When you speak the words of Torah or the words of prayer, you are donning the godly garment of speech. And when you do a mitzvah, you are donning the garment of action, and that is how the godly soul expresses and experiences the different emotions and feelings that it has towards God. And then in chapter 5, we stress that this connection that it can build through those garments, right? That garment is like a hug. That when you give someone a hug, even though, you're doing a physical mitzvah, you're putting out the tefillin, you're lighting a physical candle, whatever you might be doing in this world. But at the end of the day, you are connecting to God. And then in chapter 5, we explained at length that connection is even deeper when we talk about the study of Torah, because Torah itself is the deepest and most perfect connection and union that we can have with God, because you are engulfed in godliness, and godliness is encompassed within you, as we discussed at length. Now, we're going to switch gears, because we've really only been focusing on the godly soul. And at this point in chapter 6, the Alter Rebbe is going to switch, and he's going to start talking about the other soul. Now, because of the setup of Tanya, we started off with the godly soul, and now we're talking about, in our discussion, this is the second soul. But really, this is the first soul. This is the default, the human soul, from the moment that a baby is born, even in some versions before it's born, but from the moment of creation, we have this soul. And the reason for that is, before we get into this, to the content of the chapter itself, I want to go to the bottom of page 119, and you see that there are 3 different names that this soul is called throughout the Tanya. And that's because this same soul, because it's sort of our natural, our default, it really has 3 different roles. And based on which role we're talking about, we'll use these different names. Starting from the left, the first thing is, it is the vital soul, the nefesh hachayunis. It is what makes you alive. As we discussed, and we'll continue to discuss, anything in this world needs a power source. It needs to be connected, it needs to be powered and existified by God. We call that a soul. And so within us, the most advanced, the most developed creature of humans, we have a very sophisticated soul. And that is the first role of this natural soul, is it existifies us, it powers us, it is what gives us life. However, in our default state, this is the middle one, we are also unholy. And what I mean by that, and we're discussed at length in this chapter, is that at the end of the day, our natural state of being is we feel ourselves. We're selfish. My POV, my view of the world revolves around myself. That's not necessarily bad. We're not evil. We're not, by birth, we're not evil. We're selfish. That's an important distinction. Why are we so selfish? Because our soul that powers us, our neshama, our nefesh achiyunis, also happens to come from klippa and sitra achra. Now, the concept of klippa and sitra achra, we have explained this in the past, that everything in the world has that soul, has that godly energy powering it. But in some things, that's revealed. In some things, we can see the godliness, the holiness is revealed. But that's almost nothing. As we'll see, there's very, very few things that actually perfectly exist within that reality. Most things, that reality is covered up. Think about it. You look around the room. In this room, we're sitting in a synagogue, in the holiest place outside of Israel. Do you really see godliness? Even you look at the Holy Ark, I see velvet, which could have just as easily ended up, as a dress or as a curtain in someone's window. Nothing that we really see expresses that godliness. Why not? Because it's covered up by a shell. There is something blocking it. Now, as we'll discuss in this chapter, there's different thicknesses to that shell, but the default reality of everything is a lack of godliness. It's not godliness. Again, everything is selfish. Everything only expresses and everything only views itself. And that is that we see ourselves as a distinct entity of God. Although we really do have God within us, we don't see that reality. We see ourselves as there's God, somewhere up in the heavens or somewhere far away. There is godliness, there's a concept of spirituality, but that's not who I am. I am a physical person, and so too with everything in this world. And because of that, because of this self-centered, self-revolving worldview, the final view, the final name of this soul, which is really the one we're going to be using especially today, is it is called the animal soul. Now, animals are not bad. Animals are just extremely selfish. Everything they do revolves around how am I going to continue. And what's fascinating is that animals, even though sometimes you do see sort of an altruistic tendency in animals, right? Bees will sting, killing themselves to protect the hive. So you think, what do you mean? Of course they can. But really, that's part of their nature. Part of their nature is they know, all right, my hive is my survival really depends on my hive survival, or my flock, or my pride, whatever it might be. And so while animals have that ability, it's still part of their inborn nature that revolves around themselves. And because of that, what we'll find again and again with the animal soul is the animal soul, again, it's not bad, it's not evil, it's selfish. It's unholy. It doesn't revolve around holiness and doesn't revolve around God. It revolves around itself. And as we'll discuss, every part of the animal soul mirrors the godly soul. What we've been discussing for the past 4.5 chapters about the godly soul, all of those aspects exist in some version with the animal soul as well. Why is that? So we're starting at the top of page 119. Vihine, as it says in Ecclesiastes, Zelu umazeh asa elikim. Now, for everything God made, He made an opposite just like it. And this is used in in lots of different contexts. The Talmud tells us that for every creature that exists on land, there is a mirror, some version of that in the sea as well. For everything that exists on the positive, exists on the negative, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Key. This is how it goes with the two souls within you. Just like the divine soul consists of 10 modalities corresponding to the 10 holy sephiros, and invests herself within the 3 clothes that are holy, right? As we just discussed in our introduction, this 10 attributes, 10 emotions, or 10 intellects, however you want, the 7 intellectual and 7 emotional modalities, as they're calling it here, which embody and invest within the 3 clothes. That's the way it is in the godly soul. So too with the soul of the Sitra Achra, Again, Sitra Achra, from Klippas Noga, from the Klippa. The word Noga we'll come back to. But again, this is the middle name that we referred to before. This is from the other side. It comes from the Klippa, from that shell. The soul that interfaces with your body through your blood. Again, that references the fact that this is the powering soul. This is the soul that powers us, that gives us life. She consists of 10 modalities of her own that are tameh, that are impure, corresponding to the 10 crowns of Tumah, corresponding to the 10 crowns. Right? This is fascinating. Because although, yes?
You said 7 before. Is there a 7?
So the 7 is that the 10 modalities, we just never used the word modality, so just making sure everyone was on the same page what that meant. I use the words attributes, right? Which they are the 3 intellectual and 7 emotional.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where the number 7 comes in. Thank you for clarifying. So those, in the godly soul, what do we call those 10 things? We call them we call them spheros, right? Which it's a Hebrew word. We didn't really translate it literally. But the word sephira literally means to shine. Why? Because this is the godly existence shining through the soul. On the other hand, on the impure side, what word did we just call them? The 10 crowns of Tameh. What is the idea about a crown? The entire kingdom revolves around the crown. It views, right, the whole country revolves around the capital city around the palace around the king, and the whole king, where does his rulership come from? It's all from the crown. And so the godly, in the impure side, it views itself as the center, not as a window, a pass-through for something greater, for something beyond. It views itself as the be-all and end-all. It is the start, and it is the most important. But there's still the same 10 modalities. So continuing on page 120, Shehain, these 10 modalities are Sheva Midos Ra'is, Habayis Me'arba Yesodis Ra'im, Haniskarim Le'el. 7 bad emotions. They emerge from the 4 bad elements mentioned earlier. In chapter 1, we mentioned how the building blocks of creation from a Kabbalistic perspective is Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afar. Fire, wind, earth, and water. And generally speaking, everything that we experience, right? Laziness is mainly expressing the building block of earth. Pleasure seeking is water. Anger is fire. Haughtiness, wasting time, that's air. That's one of the examples we gave in chapter 1. And all of those also expressed in the 10 bad emotions. In the 7 bad emotions. You can love God. You can also love a lot of other things. You can love negative things. You could love things that are unholy. And those are the 7. And the next, V'seichel hamelidim halachik l'shalish shehein chachma bin odas makar hamidas. The intellect that gives birth to them, which is divided into 3, chachma, bina, and das. These 3 form the wellspring of the emotion. So here, there's a fascinating difference between the godly soul and the animal soul. The godly soul starts off from emotion. The godly soul starts off from intellect. It understands, it appreciates, it grasps the idea of godliness, and because of that, as we explained at length in chapter 3, that gives birth to the emotions. The more you think about God, right? We spoke about how do you develop a relationship with God. If you want to start loving God, how can I command you to love God? How can I tell you to fear God? The answer is you have to start intellectually. You have to start with the difference between intellect and emotion is that intellect is objective. Intellect can understand things that are not revolved around me. I can understand abstract theory that has nothing to do with me and will never have anything to do with me. In fact, that's sort of the problem of people that are overly intellectual, is that they have no subjectivity, have no investment. You can logically explain the most horrendous things. Because there's no emotion, there's no, on paper it all makes sense. Emotion adds to the equation, but how do I feel about that? Which in the extreme is a problem. Because if everything's only about how I feel, the biggest problem with that is, well, then I can never reach beyond what I feel. I can never really understand something beyond me. I can never grasp really the way someone else is feeling. Why? Because it all revolves around me. And if this would have happened to me, I would be happy, and therefore you must be happy. So the proper balance is really, we have to have both of them. But in the godly soul, where does it start? it starts objectively. I always get confused with those. It starts objectively, right? It doesn't revolve around me. I could connect to godliness. I could connect to something that's beyond me. And then that will evolve into the emotions.
Also, doesn't behavior evolve into the emotions? Even if you don't love God, if you act like you love God, eventually the feelings will come.
Yes, so as we discussed, we've had this conversation before, but it does work both ways. But ultimately, that's not going to last. Because I could force you to do a lot of things. I could force you, but if it's me forcing you, then what is it really coming from? It's coming from your fear. For someone to sit down and without love or fear of God to say, I'm going to start putting on tefillin every day, that will work, but it eventually will fizzle out. Or eventually that connection, and as we'll discuss when we discuss the battle of the two souls, putting on the tefillin itself will evoke the emotional feelings as well because of the intellectual side, and sort of it circles back around. But the action itself doesn't have that won't have that effect. I might get into a pattern. I might get into the habit of doing it, which is good because I'm doing the mitzvah, but it's a huge lacking in what it could be. Because just doing things because I'm in the habit of them is not the way we should be doing mitzvahs. And so while it is true that doing something can also lead to the emotion and to the intellect, the proper way to build it in a healthy and sustainable way is to understand it and then to do. Now, I don't want anyone to stop doing things until you fully understand them and fully appreciate them, because that's not how we're supposed to start with action, because that's the most practical. But we can't leave and we can't forget about the emotional and intellectual side of it.
We can't really understand God, right? To know God, I be God.
We can in ways that sort of connect to us. We can grasp, we can't know what God is, but we can understand about God, even in the abstract. Right? What we're learning about now, when we talk about, right now we're still learning pretty practical, but different parts of Hasidic thought, different parts of Torah are in the abstract. We are understanding, again, we can't understand God, because you're right, to understand God is to be God. And as we said time and time again, we cannot grasp God, we cannot really, what can we do? We can learn Torah, we can learn about God, we can learn how does God feel about certain things, how does God feel about us doing certain things, and with that we start to build a picture. And the clearest place we see this development of intellect leading to emotion is in prayer. In the morning prayer that we say every day, in the Shacharis prayer, we start off with what I can relate to. We start off with the morning prayers, right? What can I understand about God? So it has to start off with things that relate to me, because we're still human and our default is still always the animal soul. But what are we trying to do? We're trying to develop within the animal soul that it should experience the godly soul. We're really skipping ahead a couple chapters, so I'm not going to stress too far in this. But the idea that we're discussing here is that with the godly soul, it starts with intellect and evolves into emotion. And the best way to see that is with a human, we stand upright, right? Which means our intellect is above our emotions. Animals, for the most part, their head is either below their heart or at least equal to it, right? Because they're on all fours. And that represents that for the animal soul, our natural state of being, these two ideas are on equal footing, if not that really the emotions come first. I want to feel good. Okay, now what? What do I do about that? Well, then I use my intellect to start to figure out, well, what will make me feel good? How can I satisfy, how can I enjoy myself? How can I feel pleasure? That's the first burst of it starts with that I want to feel good. I want something. Now, in order to experience good, I have to go check in with the brain and say, well, what do you think feels good? What do you want? What can I inspire you to desire? And then what happens is the brain, under the influence of the emotions, says, you know what? Well, it depends what age I am. For a baby, that's a rattle. For a toddler, that's a toy. For a child, it's a big. And depending where we are in our intellectual progress, we'll want different things. Because at the end of the day, we're using our intellect, we're harnessing our intellect to fill our emotional desires.
When you say intellect, though, it has to do with knowledge, right? You have to learn to have intellect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're talking about, what am I using that intellect for? Am I using it to understand the abstract? Or am I limiting it to go and figure out what will make me feel good right now? Right? Because again, these 7 and 3 exist both in the animal soul and in the godly soul. The question is, what's my goal? What am I using them for? Am I using them for, I want to connect to God intellectually, right? I understand there's a God, that's the Chachma. Bina, I want to understand more about, not understand Him, I want to understand more about God and what does God do for me and what does God accomplish, which is all beyond. And then Das is I want to integrate that, I want that to be relevant to me, I want to relate to that. The animal soul works the other way. The animal soul, it all revolves around me. I want, let's use a very basic example. I want to eat. Right? And again, we're not necessarily saying I want to eat because I'm a glutton and I'm bad. I'm hungry. Now what? So that feeling, that sort of desire, but now I go check in with my brain and I say, I'm hungry. What do you think I should eat? And then the brain, the intellect, well, it really depends on where I am. As we continue on the bottom of page 120, Ki hamides hein lefi erech haseichel. In what way are they a wellspring? In the sense that they act as a sort of funnel for the soul's emotion. As a result, her emotions emerge as big or as small as her mental scope permits. Continue on page 121. Ki hakatan cheshek v'oihev devarim ketanim chusei ha'erech lefi shesichlei katan v'katzer lahasig devarim yikarim yeser mehem. For instance, although everyone seeks whatever is pleasurable to them, small children desire and cherish small, inconsequential things. That's because their minds are too small and limited to comprehend the value of things that are more precious. V'chein miskayis and miskatzef b'dvarim ketanim v'chein b'yispirus v'sar midas. As well, they lose their temper, get upset over minor things. The same goes for things they boast about and the rest of their emotions. At the end of the day, our emotions are limited by our intellect. Because I'm checking in, right? I want to feel pride. So I check in with my brain and I say, what's a good thing, if I want to go brag to my friend, what should I brag about? So a child will brag about, my dad is bigger than your dad. A more developed adult would say, I accomplished, I can skateboard much better than you. And as we develop, all of our emotions develop with the brain. Right? Because that is the way that we can express our emotions. It runs through the intellect. Again, just like the godly soul, the intellect is what tells us what to feel and how to feel it. But because it's starting from an emotional place, it can never go beyond where I am right now. Our intellect is limited by the selfishness and by the self-revolving, and whatever I can relate to, I feel good about. You never find a child, you could find it, but in a natural state, a child will never say something, will never boast about something that's abstract. Will never boast about, my connection to God is deeper than your connection. Why not? Because its entire, intellectual pursuit, because this is coming from a place of boastfulness, it wants to experience that, selfish feeling. It's limited by its emotions. And the real process that we're talking about here, right? We just like with the godly soul, we understood where it itself comes from. We understood what it experiences, and then we spoke about how it expresses itself. So we didn't really get into yet, the order is a bit lopsided here, about where it comes from. Where is this animal soul from? We didn't discuss yet. What we did discuss is we experience what it experiences. And the answer is it experiences everything from a selfish perspective. And that's the main thing to keep in mind about the godly soul going forward. Everything will revolve around it. Everything revolves around the soul itself. Now, how does the animal soul express itself? Right. So the godly soul had the clothing, the thought, speech, and action of doing mitzvos and learning Torah. But what's the process for the animal soul? So this is page 123. As for the soul's clothing, the eser b'chines elu hatmeis k'sha'adam mechashev bahen a medaber eisa. Let's say you engage these 10 tummy modalities of emotion and attitudes, granting them expression by actually thinking, speaking, or doing something related to them. Right. So again, you're using the same garments. When you do so, the thought process going in your brain or verbalizing of your mouth, or the activity you're doing with your hand or the other limbs can be called the tainted clothing of these 10 tamei modalities. After all, as you perform the act, speak these words, or process these thoughts, those 10 tamei modalities are actively investing themselves in these activities. When you do something because that's what your animal soul wants to do, for no other reason, right? Again, we'll use a pretty mundane example, but you're sitting down to eat for no other reason than you desire it. What's happening then? What is embodying your power to chew? What's powering that? Why are you chewing right now? When you're eating something because for no other reason than you want to eat this delicious looking steak.
It's your hunger, you're satisfying your hunger.
As we'll see, even just to satisfy your hunger is not necessarily enough to remove it from this category. But let's take it a little bit further to the extreme. Someone is just giving in, they're completely full. They have no reason, this is dessert. They're already full, now they're eating dessert. And they're sitting down, why are they chewing this cake? Because their animal soul wants to. Their animal soul desired something sweet, desired something more, and so it decided, I'm going to act on that and I'm going to eat it. So what's powering? Why am I chewing this? Because that's what my animal soul wants to do. And so what is happening is my animal soul is enclosed in my power to chew. And this is a tremendous difference because if we just compare that for a second, there's very few times, but one example of when you're actually eating. If that dessert was on Shabbat, it's completely okay. Not only is it okay, it's a mitzvah. And therefore, when if it's Friday morning and I'm chewing on this dessert, what's powering my body? What's powering my power to chew? My animal soul. If it's 24 hours later and it's Shabbat morning, what's happening? This is my godly soul being embodied within my power to chew.
I mean, your body is part of your animal soul.
So for right now, we're going to say that our body is sort of this neutral territory. And so every action that I do, everything that my body does could either be because it's my animal soul powering it. I'm chewing this because I want to feel good. I want to enjoy this chocolate cake. Or it could be because my godly soul is powering it. What is behind the chew? Why am I chewing this? Is it to satisfy my own pleasures? Or is it to connect to God? And depending on why I'm doing it, that's a difference of what is embodying this action.
So your godly soul will tell you you're not hungry, don't eat.
That's a great question.
Use brain.
What did she ask?
The question is, so what does that mean? Your godly soul is saying you're not hungry, don't eat? Right? What is your godly soul saying? What's the conversation? We'll get to that. And that is, this is sort of the first chapter in a series of we discuss the godly soul, now just the animal soul, and then we'll discuss how they interact with each other. We will get a little bit more clarity on your question in today's chapter, but we'll have to wait a little bit longer for full understanding. Before we get to that, I've been sort of skirting around the idea that, are we talking about sins here? Are we talking about sinning? The chocolate cake that I'm eating, is it kosher or is it non-kosher?
It's a trick question, I feel like.
It is a trick question.
It's kosher on Shabbat.
So I'm using the word kosher in the very literal sense.
Okay.
Right? This is, even if it's 100% kosher. Right? So now, is that still, if I eat a kosher piece of food, is that my animal soul acting or my godly soul acting?
Both, yeah.
So as we'll find, you don't really find both. It's either or. And that's because ultimately, my godly soul wants one thing and one thing alone. It wants to connect to God. If this action doesn't actively connect me to God, it's not godly soul. Even if it's completely allowed. If this is not actively connecting me to God, if this is not a godly reality, if this is not a godly action, my godly soul doesn't want it. And so therefore, as we continue on page 124, Ve'hein heim kol hamaisim aser nasim tachas hashemesh asher kol hevel v'ruach ra. What are these activities that provide tainted clothing for the soul? They are all activities done under the sun, all of them being hot air and a breaking of the spirit. It doesn't. We tend to like to think of the world as there's the things I'm not allowed to do, right? There's the things you're not allowed to eat non-kosher. There's things I'm supposed to do, eating on Shabbat. Then there's that gray area, right? Then it's like not, whatever. It's neutral. As we'll see in today's chapter, there is no such thing as neutral. You're either for us or against us. You're either part of God, you're actively connecting to God, or you're not. And if you're not, even though it's allowed, it's still not connecting to God. It's still your animal soul acting. Breaking of the spirit, the Zohar in Parshat B'Shalach explains, means that these activities called spiritual damage. Just eating for eating's sake actively harms your soul, because as we'll continue to see, there's a battle. And a win for one side is a loss for the other side. It's a zero-sum game. And so therefore, doing a mundane activity, that's going to be an important word. Doing a mundane activity is ultimately a loss for the godly soul. The same goes for any talk and any thought that are unrelated to God, to fulfilling His will and to doing what He wants from you. That's the implication of the term sitra achra, the other side. It is simply that which is not the side of holiness. The other side doesn't mean the what we like to think of the impure. Even the term impure, in our context, is it pure? No. Therefore, it's impure. There's no place, and there's no gray zone here. If you're not on the side of God, automatically you're sitra achra, which Kabbalistically speaking is an umbrella term for everything that's allowed, not allowed, allowed, not allowed, evil, bad, anything that's not on the side of God is included in an umbrella term. Which means that under this big umbrella, you can have kosher food, you can have hobbies, you can have hanging out with people. As we'll see, it's not, there is obviously a way of making everything holy, or most things holy, I should say. All of this mundane can become holy, but at its default, it's not. Because at its default, do you see godliness in it? No. And therefore, it's ungodly. Why?
So eating just for satisfying your hunger is ungodly and part of the sitra achra, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And that's a sin?
I didn't say that.
No, I know you didn't.
That's an important thing, because that is what we're going to be discussing. Eating because I'm hungry is theoretically neutral. Why do you want to be full? That's really the next question we have to ask ourselves. I'm hungry. I need to survive. But why?
So I can become holy?
Then your eating is holy. Then you're eating the mundane. And we can really extend this point to a lot of things. You have a hobby, right? Somebody knits. Is that action itself a holy action? Is that a godly action? No. And therefore, on the surface, while I'm knitting, what soul is embodying that? The animal soul. But because knitting is a permitted activity, as long as it's not Chabad, because knitting is something I'm allowed to do, if I'm using that downtime, that relaxation, to then allow me to go back and serve God, we're human. God knows that we're human. God knows we need time to eat, and we need time to sleep, and we need time to rest. All of those are part of the equation. And so therefore, if I use that downtime to then be able to return to my studies or my connection or my godliness with a vigor, then it's not sitra achra anymore. Now that's holiness. Yes?
Can I ask? There are many people who follow the family routine. The family routine is we have breakfast at 7 a.m. We have lunch at 1 p.m. We eat dinner at 7 p.m. because that is the way we do things in this or that family. Is that godly or ungodly? Because they're not doing it because of the soul. They're doing it because that is the way the family behaves.
So as we'll see, doing it just because That's right, because that is our life. This is really when we start to realize what the Tanya is trying to tell us. What the Alter Rebbe is trying to tell us is that just doing things because, by definition, means if it's just because, is it for godly reasons? No. Which means, by definition, it is on the other side. Now, is it bad? Is it a sin? No. But what it does mean is we have to start training ourselves. We have to start getting into that mode of that there is no just because. I have to be, I have to be cognizant. I have to be thinking about these things. While I'm doing the seemingly mundane, every time I'm making a decision. Am I doing this just because, or am I doing this for godly reasons? Now again, godly reasons doesn't mean that I'm doing this, that I'm actively, learning Torah. Eating so that I can then have energy to continue. And you know what? I have something else to say. Being part of a family, connecting to our family, having friendships, having relationships. It all goes under this sort of neutral thing. If I'm friends with someone, because I don't know, we were put in the same class in kindergarten and we never drifted apart, so I still happen to be friends with them. That's neutral. In fact, that's usually pretty self-centered. But if I'm friends with someone, and while I'm friends with them, I'm cognizant of the fact that the Torah tells me, "V'yahavta l'reacha kamocha," love everyone as yourself. Or I'm cognizant of the fact that the Torah tells me to have good relationships with people, to be sever panim yafos, to be friendly. Suddenly what I'm doing is godly. But I have to be cognizant of that fact. I have to be actively embracing that. As we continue, there's some these shaded boxes, as you might realize. There's a lot of them in this chapter, and that's because we're really discovering a new way of looking at the world. And so, if you want to look more in depth, I highly suggest looking at these shaded boxes. But for now, the Alter Rebbe is reminding us that what is holiness? Holiness means somewhere a godly place. And so on page 127, we're continuing. V'tzad hakedusha. Right, we finished 125, right? Yeah. What is the side of holiness? If everything is either for holiness or against holiness, we have to define what holiness is. And holiness is, the side of holiness is nothing other than God's holiness residing and freely extending somewhere. And God only resides upon that which is batal to him, not obstructing his presence by asserting its own existence. If something is expressing its own existence, if it revolves around itself, by definition, it's not cognizant, and it's not batal. The word batal is a kind of one of those Hasidic words that's hard to define. But in this case, we're using the term as nullified. Right? Why the reality that it's experiencing, is it doing it for itself, or is it doing it because of God? And that is always the question that we're going to be asking. Someone once asked the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, where is God? You know what he answered? God is wherever you let him in. Any part of our life, as we'll see with some limitations, if you allow God to be part of that, if you allow it to be about God, then it's godly, then it's holy. If not, then it automatically is sitra achra, it's automatically the other side. It's automatically klippa, because think about it. If it's not actively God, if this is not an action which is godly, that means that the shell exists, it's being covered over, its true God essence is being covered over, which means that it's part of klippa. It's part of the other side. The sitra achra. Now we're going to spend a few moments here to talk about what does it mean to be nullified to God. Page 128. Bein b'poyel mamish, kemalachim elyonim. That could be an actual bittul, as with the angels above. The one thing about angels, and really one of the big differences that distances us and separates us from the angels, is the fact that the angels experience godliness. What do angels do a whole day? Do you know? So there are specific angels that God sends out sort of as messengers to do. But even that, why are they doing God's bidding? Because they experience godliness. They know, they are basking on this. The vast majority of angels just stand praising God from morning till night until they become so encompassed in godliness that they just cease to exist on their own. They become reincorporated within God. Why? Because they experience a literal bittul, a literal nullification of themselves within godliness. That is one way of having this experience. It's literal. Bein b'koyach k'chol ish Yisrael lamata. Or it could be with a latent bittul, as with every Jew here and below in this world. For every Jew is innately capable of the ultimate bittul. When their connection to God is put to the test, a Jew will willfully surrender their very life for God's holiness. This is a fascinating idea that Jews, because of our godly soul, we all have the potential to be fully nullified. And for some people, you only see that when they're really put against the wall. But the fact is that ultimately, a Jewish person, when faced with the choice of being connected to God or being severed from God, will choose the choice to be connected to God. Now, problem is that most choices that we make, we don't see that we don't see that dichotomy. We don't realize that when I'm choosing between eating kosher and non-kosher, what I'm really, really choosing is to be severed or be connected. And because of that, sometimes we make the wrong choice. But when it's really, there's no other way of phrasing the question. When a Jew is offered either serve idol worship, serve idols, fully disconnect yourself from God, or die, throughout the generations, Jews of all levels of affiliation, all levels of knowledge, have chosen to give up their life. Because they have, in potential, every Jew wants to be fully nullified. And therefore, because of the innate power that Jewish people have, the potential to be fully nullified, we continue on page 129. V'lechein amar Razal, afilu echad sheyesh v'esek b'Torah, shechina shruya. V'kol be'asira asara shechinta shchayir la'elam. And that's why, as the rabbis of the Talmud say, whenever even one Jew sits down and occupies himself with Torah, the Shekhinah resides there. And they say the Shekhinah resides upon any assembly of 10 Jews, regardless of the circumstances.
The Shekhinah being God's presence.
Shekhinah being God's presence, right? Because again, where is God? Wherever you let him in. Therefore, even if one Jew is sitting and learning Torah, they're letting God into that moment. This is a moment about God. God's there. But there's also the potential for that. So if there are 10 Jews, sort of that 10 potentials come together and equal no matter what they're doing. You can have 10 Jews on a hike together. God is there, which is why we're told, the Alter Rebbe discussed in other places in Tanya, how there's a huge sort of power that we have when you have 10 Jews gathered together. If you use it for the right reasons, it's incredible. Could you imagine if you have, it's bittul, it's nullification squared. Because you have 10 Jews, plus the fact you're actively praying, it's incredible power. But if you have 10 Jews gathered together and they're doing something wrong, then you have God's presence there and you're actively ignoring it. And so that's much worse. Why? Because God is wherever He's led in. Even if it's just one person, but you're actively allowing God in, that's great. If there are 10 Jews, which every Jew has that potential for bittul, for that nullification, so 10 Jews together equal one active letting God in, and therefore God's there no matter what those 10 Jews are doing. So right now, we understand a new thing about the world. And that is, everything in the world is either either holy, actively connected in bittul and nullified to God. It is actively submitting itself to God, or it's not. And if it's not, no matter what it is, for right now, it's a problem. Because this is not godliness. This is continuing on page 130. But then there are all those things, all those beings that lack bittul to him. They assert themselves instead as entities of their own, disconnected from their Creator. So, the first thing we have to understand is, where do we all get our power to exist? Where do we all? Who created us? This shouldn't be a hard question. Who created us? God. And as we know, God didn't just create us once upon a time. God actively recreates us and repowers us every single second. So, the problem becomes, if I am actively rebelling against God right now, or not even actively, if I'm passively rebelling against God right now by not allowing Him into this moment, where does my power come from? Where's my energy coming from? If I'm rejecting God in this moment, where does my power come from? And the answer is obviously it's still God. But it takes a much more circular, much more detour-y route. And this is page 130 in the middle. Although everything that exists receives its energy from God's holiness, these beings don't receive it directly from the inner track of that holiness, from its raw core essence and all of its glory. Instead, they receive energy from the outer track. What is this outer track? Continue on page 131. This is the track by which this divine light and energy becomes greatly diminished. It descends from one level to the next through myriads of levels in the great chain of worlds, steadily degrading via cause and effect and multiple condensations of energy. These are all Kabbalistical ideas of how does God's energy come to this world. Right? So God, my sons have a bath toy that, if you pour water from the top, and then you create a bunch of different sort of obstacles for the water to go through, different loops and different fans and spigots and all the different parts of the thing. That's really what we're talking about here. Yes, everything ultimately, all energy sources itself from God. It has to. That's the only source of energy that we have. But when you're doing a mitzvah, what's powering that? A direct connection, a direct line. You're getting straight from the source. But then there's also the way God can dilute, and God can sort of disguise and hide and change his energy as it comes down through cause and effect. Right? There's the sort of a Rube Goldberg machine of God's energy. What's causing that? Ultimately, what's causing that ball to go into the bucket? My initial pressing of the button. But there are so many different things that the energy had to go through and transform, and that's really what we're talking about. Yes, it's still godly energy, but it's being very, very disguised and hidden and condensed along the way. Continuing on page 131, ad shenismayit kol kacha erva chayus miyat acharmiyot ad sheyachol istamtzei muslabish bebechinas golus teich oisei davar nifrod. Eventually, the signal of light and life energy becomes so diminished through multiple phases of reduction that it is capable of squeezing itself within this disconnected being, not genuinely residing there, but rather in a kind of exile, stifled and muted. Is there a godly energy there? Yes. But is it there comfortably? Is it where it's supposed to be? Is it where in a revealed way? No. It's there, hidden somewhere inside, but it's such a diluted and muted version that God's presence is not really felt in that moment, in that action, in that person.
And this is putting it all on us to connect with God.
Absolutely.
But isn't there a concept in Judaism that God can hide his face from us? He can be angry with us. He pulls himself away from us.
Yes. So there are different, when we talk about God's presence and God's, God being in the moment, there are different things that we're talking about here. Right? There's the most basic understanding that we usually have of God's presence, right? That I can feel God in this moment. Is God shining upon me? The blessing that the holy priest gives, the holy blessing that the priest gives on the holidays. Yivrechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yor Hashem panav elecha. May God shine His countenance upon you. Right? What do you mean? Everything I do, God's there. But there's a big difference in the way God shines on us. That God is choosing to reveal Himself among us. But even when God's hidden, right now, we don't feel God. We're learning Torah. We're building that connection. God is present in this moment in all of us, and in the paper, and the table, and the chairs. Everything that we're using to learn Torah, God is there. We still don't feel God's presence. That was really reserved for the most holy place, for the Beis HaMikdash, for the Holy Temple, for the most holy times, etc. So although we're using the word God's revelation, it depends where we're talking about and what kind of thing we're talking about. Continuing on page 133. This very hidden, very diluted God's energy, which is, yes, present within everything, because at the end of the day, right, even a piece of pork, if God is not existifying it, it would cease to exist. It wouldn't be there anymore. Right? Now, obviously, the God's energy that is making that non-kosher food exist is not nearly the same energy that's making a Torah scroll exist. but at its core there is the same energy. And what accomplishes is it enters into the subliminal state so that it can enliven this thing, so that it can sustain its continuous regeneration out of the void. For otherwise, this thing will revert to absolute null state that precedes its creation. This is all of these things that we're learning now are all from part 1 of the Tanya. As we mentioned in our first class, the Tanya is really made up of 5 parts. The second part, called Shar HaYichud Ve'amunah, discusses this idea. How everything in the world, its default state is not to exist. And therefore, if something exists, it means that God is choosing for it to exist. And God is currently actively powering and existifying that thing. Why? That's usually the question that we have. Why does God choose to make this piece of pork exist? We'll leave that question for now. But ultimately, everything in the world has a godly spark within it. But there's a huge difference in the presence and in the revelation of the godly spark in a Torah scroll and in the godly spark in something that's non-kosher. Continuing on the bottom of page 133. V'lochein nikra olam hazeh umloyeh olam haklipa v'sitra achra. This strangling and entrapment of life energy explains why this world and all it contains is called the world of Klippa and Sitra Achra. I want to just translate those words again. Klippa means a shell. Klippa means shell. And Sitra Achra means the other side. So most of what exists in this world, do you see God's presence? No. Right? Even the quote-unquote neutral, the mundane, because it's not actively allowing God to be there, it feels itself, it experiences itself. Because of that, most of this world and everything that fills this world is called the world of Klippa and Sitra Achra. The shell and the other side. Because again, if you're not actively God, if God isn't revealed, then it means God is covered up, and now it's from the other side. Page 134. V'lochein.
But if you believe though that every second of every day requires God's energy to keep it going, and you know the difference between when something is alive and something is dead, whenever you look at something, when you see life, you know that God is there, right? Because it wouldn't,
So I could know something, but that's not revealed within that thing. I could know intellectually that yes, if something exists, that means that God created it. But is God revealed in that? Is godliness, right? Let me ask you a question. If you have a bowl, a wooden bowl, right? Now, obviously, trees don't grow in the shape of a bowl. So it means that someone had to create this. I can understand this on an intellectual level. But do I know who created it? Do I know how it was created, when it was created? Do I know anything about its creation? I know that it was created, right? I can understand it intellectually, but I still don't know. The creator is not revealed in that bowl. And that's what we're talking about here. Sure, on an intellectual level, you're right. After we walk away from this class, we'll be able to walk around and know that everything that exists is because God is constantly existifying. But does it on its own express that godliness? Does it on its own feel that godliness? And the answer is no. God is not revealed in that thing right now because it's hidden. Because it's not actively expressing godliness. It's not actively connected and doing and experiencing that godliness. Page 134. V'lechein kol ma'isa olam hazeh kashim v'reim v'rasheim gevrim b'ei k'mesh kasev b'etz chaim shar membei sei perik dalam. And that explains why everything in this world is full of hardships and suffering, and the wicked have the upper hand, as stated in Eitz Chaim, Portal 41, the end of chapter 4. Okay? This world is ultimately, by and large, a lack of God's presence. But now, in the final part of this chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to a fundamental difference. That while it is true that God's presence is not revealed, that there's a lot of mundane, which is quote-unquote the other side, there is a big difference in many things. And that is, what type of shell do we have? Is this a permanent, impermeable shell? Or is this a shell that I could very easily take off and reveal the godliness within it? And this is going to be the start of our discussion about how do I make the mundane holy? When I'm sitting down to eat that chocolate cake, to eat that dessert, or to have that steak, I want to feel all of those things. Until now, we're being pretty harsh. We're saying that if it's not actively God, if it's not actively learning Torah or doing mitzvos, it's the animal soul, it's the other side, it's klipa. But now the Alter Rebbe is going to teach us how do we extract that. So we'll start off from with this discussion about these two types of shells. This is page 134 in the middle. Although all klippos lack the bittul requirement for holiness to reside within them, they are still split into two levels, one lower than the other. Hamadrega hatachtena, he shalish klippos atmeis v'reis lagamri ve'ein behem tev klal. At the lower level are the three klippos that are thoroughly tamei and bad. Tamei means impure. They contain no good at all within them. These are the things that have absolutely no good, no potential for good even within them. Page 135, these three klippos in this lower category are referred to in Ezekiel's vision as a chariot of a storm of wind, a great cloud, and a flashing fire. There's different names, very, very harsh descriptors that he gives for sort of a complete lack of godliness, lack of even the potential for godliness. Now, what comes from those things? What is created? What's covered? Not created, but what's covered by that type of shell? Anything that we can never access and bring back to godliness. The godly spark within these things are completely off limits, untouchable. We'll discuss over the next few chapters about so what are they? What are they doing here? Why do they get? All of those are good questions. But for right now, we have to recognize that certain things are completely off limits. We have no ability to extract them. Right? It's like, if you're having pistachios, and some of them are fully sealed up, and there's no way to open it up, you just have to throw out that pistachio. That's what we're talking about here. This is an impermeable shell. There's no way for us to access that holiness, that godliness that resides within it. No question?
And they don't change. I mean, that's the way they are, and we can't do anything to change.
For as of right now, yes. I mean, the Tanya is going to discuss a little bit further about sort of who and when and what, but for right now, basic understanding is that yes, these are the three impure, impermeable shells that completely surround this thing.
How many klippot are there?
So there are four. We don't discuss why there's three and one and sort of what those three different are, because there's no practical applicational difference. It's just sort of a Kabbalistical concept about that there are four types of shells. The three lower ones that are completely impure and impermeable, and the one higher one, which we'll discuss soon. Page 136. Out of these three lower klippos come, all of these things we have no access to. We cannot extract godliness and holiness from them. The souls of all the other nations of the world and the sustaining force of their bodies. The souls of all tamei animals that we are forbidden to eat, along with the sustaining force of their bodies. The sustaining force and life energy of all forbidden edible vegetation, such as fruits of the first 3 years of a tree that's forbidden mixture of seeds, right? Those are things that Torah tells you can't eat. You can't eat the arla, the first 3 years of a tree, and mixing, grafting two different species and creating one great thing from them. We can't eat them. We're not. This is not halacha class about how do we have an apricot and a peach and all these different modern day hybrids. That's a different discussion. As written in Eitz Chaim, Portal 49, Chapter 6. So too, these klippos come from the sustaining force and life energy of every act, word, and thought that touches upon any of the 365 Torah prohibitions or anything derived from them. As written there in Eitz Chaim at the end of Chapter 5. Anything that you're not allowed to do, an unholy, right, a thought that you're not allowed to have, or a speech you're not allowed to say, talking lashon hara. What's that covered up by? Gossip, evil gossip, and spreading rumors by people. That's off limits. That's shalosh klippos and veis. As we'll continue to see, this is the extreme. There is a gray area in the sense that although right now it's still covered over and it doesn't express godliness and it doesn't necessarily experience godliness, we have the ability to open up that shell and to extract the godliness, as we will, God willing, continue next week with Chapter 7. Thank you everyone for joining. Sorry, I went a little bit over time. But for now, that is the discussion for today.